I, as you know, have been watching a lot of D&D for the
Oh, yeah.
last couple of weeks.
Love
I
it.
don't know why. I think
No, it's the Joe you were thinking about doing
Manganiello.
a breakdown.
I was gonna do a nerd breakdown.
A video. So there's Henry Cavill. For people who don't know, Henry Cavill and Joe Manganiello are very big into nerdy things like Dungeons and Dragons, Warhammer 40,000. And so you were going to do a video on how to be charismatic and cool because people really like those guys while having super nerdy hobbies.
Yeah.
And it took you down a rabbit hole.
Took me down to D&D.
Super nerdy hobbies.
Yeah. So I could tell stories about campaigns, but I won't. I won't bore you.
You understand now why at age 13 I used to sneak away to play a role-playing game.
What I notice is that the difference between nerds and everyone else is simply, I guess it's kind of two things. It's imagination and lack of shame around that imagination. So take comic books. They were nerdy.
Yep.
Like the 90s, that they were not cool.
Yeah.
But it's because you had to like imagine these things. But as soon as they put it on a big screen and like let it play out, they're modern day gods. You know, like everybody loves Iron Man. But at the time you had to imagine this guy. You see these people like painting their little action figures like pew pew, and I step around and I slice you know, and I would say the majority of people look at that and go, what dorks. Mm-hmm. But if they could see that scene playing out in front of them, would be so freaking into it because the stories are fun and you're engaged and you're playing it. And Baldur's Gate.
Dude, I'll do you one better. If I tell you that I personally have created a cleric character and I gave him 16 dexterity because it helps my armor class, everyone is just like, nerd.
Yeah.
But if I tell you that I know that Joel Embiid averaged 24 points and 12 rebounds last season, and I think he's going to do 26 and 13 this season, but his plus minus is worse than Rudy Gobert's because his defense is underrated. Nobody thinks I'm a nerd. Maybe they think I like basketball too much or I'm too in the weeds, but no one is like, oh, let's bully that. Let's tease that. That's something to be ashamed of. Knowing the same like stats, but for something you can't even participate in. Something you can only watch and shout at as you have no influence on the outcome. Yeah. But in this game where you are a full participant, having that same knowledge is just poo-pooed because it's not cool for whatever reason.
And so the funny thing about fantasy football is it still has this, you still get to watch football, right? It's still, there's no imagination really, or less imagination necessary than with these games. But you could imagine if you were into like real fantasy football, like my team punts and like kicks, people would think that you're a nerd because what is required in all of these things is imagination and a lack of shame about the vivid world that you're capable of creating in your head and co-creating with your friends. And so just for me, it made me think a couple of things. That if you were a nerd back in the day, I really think you should lean into that because technology is making it so that you need less and less imagination in order to do these things. And so Dungeons and Dragons was this fringe thing. When Baldur's Gate 3 releases, it's going to be one of the biggest video games.
Oh, it's going to be amazing because so Baldur's Gate 3 is based around Dungeons and Dragons 5e. I didn't even know what what that was until I bought the video game, but it's just the rule set. So like every couple of years, Dungeons and Dragons, I guess, updates their rule set. In let's say a year when this game releases and is, I think, going to be one of the biggest selling computer games of the year, 100 times more people will know the rules to Dungeons and Dragons 5e on accident because they'll just be playing this game and they'll have to learn the game system.
So I don't know if this is a stock tip or if this is a business tip, but think of the imagination stuff that you loved as a kid. So like we would play paintball, but imagine that we had set the forest on fire and like there was no time and we had to like run at each other. Like we would come up with all of these things and see if you can create that same experience for someone who doesn't have imagination. Yeah. And I promise you will have a banger of a business on your. So like if you can somehow, I mean, even prior to paintball, it was like, I'm shooting you, and that's nerdy. But okay, now I've got a paintball gun that hits.
Game of Thrones was a book. It did pretty well. Yeah. And then they just made it a TV show and it smashed.
Yes. So find ways, or not even find ways. Take the things that you imagined as a kid that were amazing and like make a movie or a video game or a VR thing or some kind of a thing, because everything that was nerdy is about to become the coolest shit ever. Yep. And you saw it with Game of Thrones. You're going to see it with D&D as these video games come out. And video games in general used to be these hyper nerdy things. And why? Because you had to imagine more because the graphics were worse. It's like what was this little door, like this little dot hopping around? He's like, that is a knight, and he's in the land of. It's like, this is fucking stupid. He hits him for 14 damage. All of a sudden, you've got a health bar and a guy, and he bleeds a sudden, and 14 damage makes everybody loves God of War. Never mind the fact that you've got hit points just like you did back in the days of I don't know, Dragon Quest.
I think it's a great point. It is funny actually. A lot of the nerdy stuff is becoming incredibly popular. The Witcher on Netflix was an obscure Polish book. It became a video game and then became one of the most popular Netflix TV shows.
Yep. So whatever it is, and I want to play this game with us, because what it means is like just go back to when you were a kid and that feeling that you felt.
Dude, I got it, and I'll give it away because no one will do it. But it was Vampire the Masquerade.
What's happening?
It's just a nerdier Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are. It's in production for a video game.
So, and I don't know. I think there's going to be technology beyond that incorporates VR or whatever. Yeah. But we don't need to beat this one to death. I think there's a lot there, and I think that people will underestimate the success of like moving from tabletop role playing to video game role playing. It's going to be 100 or 1,000 factor.
So I think the one thing that Henry and Joe have in common, and that I have seen myself in my own life, is what you look like.
Yeah.
Has a massive impact on how people interpret your nerdy hobbies. So when I was a kid, I hit puberty incredibly late. So I was like really small. I had acne. My teeth were fucked up. And when I liked comic books and role-playing games and all that stuff, it was not well received as like a cool thing, but had a little bit of a glow up. And I tell girls if I'm meeting them and it comes up that I like this nerdy stuff now, and like no one cares. And so I don't know the answer yet, but I do feel like there's a bit of thin slice bias because someone sees you before they learn your hobbies. And so like they see you and they're like, okay, I've got you assessed. You're like a well-dressed guy in an expensive bar where I know the drinks are expensive. It turns out that you like Dungeons and Dragons. I don't care because I've already decided based on your clothes and where we're located that you're cool.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
People love it when you break the type that they place you into. They become very interested in that.
Yes. So there's a guy from Big Bang Theory who loves Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
And I think that's a less interesting thing to people than the fact that Henry Cavill does. Because Henry Cavill looks like a marble statue.
Yep. 100%.
So the question is like, well, what do you do? Because we're giving all this advice. Like, what do you do if you're the Big Bang Theory guy? I think you still lean into it.
You lift weights.
I mean, maybe you
no, I'm going to make the video, and it's there's an element of like, look, muscle is one way to get a different typecast, but I do see that, and I experienced this abroad. I had two options when I was abroad. When I walked up to somebody for the first time, I could start speaking in English or Spanish/Portuguese, depending on where we were. If I started in Spanish and Portuguese, I had solid Spanish and Portuguese, and we would continue, and it would be a fine interaction.
Yeah, but not impressed. No one's like, oh my God, wow.
It's like, oh, how long you've been here for? Yeah, cool. If I started in English, and I just went for like 10 minutes in English, and then somebody walked up, and they would try in English, and they'd be like, what's that word? And then I would just bust out the Portuguese, mind blown.
Yeah,
all of a sudden,
I would see it. They'd be like, "Oh my God!"
All of a sudden, my Spanish and Portuguese were next level. Yeah. How and it was literally just allowing them to put me into a box and then breaking out of it. And so I've done that with a lot of. I've tried to set up situations like that at various times in my life with regards to how I present myself. So if you wear a particular set of clothes or you look really big and buff, I actually think if you've stereotyped yourself to be the big tough guy, you got a shaved head, you got the big beard, you got tattoos, and you like go in a conversation like that for 5-10 minutes with a couple of dudes, and then you bust out Dungeons and Dragons, those dudes will fucking love you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Like you're like, and you know everything about the movies and like all that trivia. It's gonna go over so well. Versus even if you dress like that, but immediately break out of the box, like you want to let people put you into the box and then.
You know what's interesting? Sometimes I do find that if you're in that circle, though, like you're not always welcome because of the way you look, if that makes sense. So like if I go to an improv class and most people are kind of, they're more out of shape and they don't dress particularly well and they are the type of person you would assume likes Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, I like Dungeons and Dragons too. They're not super hyped about it necessarily. They're kind of just like, no, we don't want you in this.
You're gonna have to prove your cred.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, I think that occurs for sure. Hope that you guys enjoyed that clip. If you want to see more like this and have us do more podcasts, we are 100% funded by our generous patrons. And if you'd like to contribute, there's a link in the description, and we'll have one pop up on the screen right here so that we can do more podcasts where we have fun conversations and hopefully some deep ones like this. Either way, hope that you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.